Very good evening to you. Welcome to Bottomline Africa, where we talk about issues that are affecting the region. And right now, the entire region is reeling from that report that was done by CNN on November 17th, that broadcast a video showing traders buying and selling migrants from West Africa for a few $100s in a Libyan marketplace. And that has caused quite a concern. And that will be the topic that we'll be talking about tonight on Bottomline Africa. I'll introduce my guest a little later on in this show. Migration in Africa's ballooning population dominates a meeting that brings together at least 80 leaders from Africa and Europe in Ivory Coast. Relatives of migrants who have allegedly been detained in Libya staged massive protest in the Moroccan capital, Rabat. A Zimbabwean court has dropped charges against a pastor and activist behind the flag protest against the former Mugabe regime. And we'll tell you about a study done in Tanzania indicating that a simple water test could just prevent a crippling bone disease. But right now, let's go through our Twitter poll question. We're asking, is the African Union's proposal to adopt illegal immigrants sustainable? Is the African Union's proposal to adopt illegal immigrants sustainable? Let us know what you think. Tweeters at KTN News. You can tweet me as well at Linda Ogutu. Please use the hashtag Bottomline Africa so that I'm able to trace and indeed track your feedback. All right, so more than 80 African and European leaders are already gathered in the Ivory Coast to discuss on how to promote jobs and stability for Africa's next exploding population, with some calling for a, quote, new Marshall. Well, the two-day summit in Abidjan opens as the European Union increasingly sees its fate linked to Africa's following the twin shock of unprecedented migration and terrorist attacks. It comes as China, India, Japan, and the Gulf Arab states and others also compete for influence on a continent where the 28 EU remains a whole, the biggest economic and political player. The European Parliament President Antonio Tajani told parliamentarians from both continents before the summit that there was little time to find ways to meet the needs of an African population set to more than double by 2050 to around 2.4 billion people.
Das Thema der illegalen Migration.
The topic of illegal immigration plays a role all over the African continent now, because there are reports that young African men are being sold like slaves in Libya, and that is why this topic has a high emotional significance here. Consequently, there is a common interest to end illegal immigration and instead create legal opportunities for Africans like studying or training in the EU.
Well, separately, French President Emmanuel Macron said that it was not France's job to tell Africans what to do as he began a West African tour that he hoped would build ties between Europe and the continent. Macron, who was speaking to university students in Burkina Faso before a visit to Ghana and Ivory Coast, is aiming to focus his trip on youth and boost cooperation on education, the digital economy, and the environment. The visit will also focus heavily on migration. Macron said he would call for greater cooperation between Europe and Africa to tackle traffickers of people, drugs, and arms during a leaders' summit in Ivory Coast on Wednesday. He specifically proposed a cooperation between European and African countries to protect and rescue people trapped in Libya after recent reports appearing to show African migrants being sold in the country.
Je ne vous donnerai pas de leçons.
I won't lecture you. The President of France shouldn't explain to an African country how it should organize its constitution, how it should organize its election or freedom of opposition. Incidentally, what I won't expect is from an African president on European affairs. But it is his, a French president's, role to stand by those who work daily to make democracy and the rule of law irreversible. I will also propose that Africa and Europe come to aid of people trapped in Libya by wholeheartedly supporting the evacuation of people in danger. It is a duty, it is our duty.
Still on the Libyan migrants crisis, dozens of families of Moroccan migrants who disappeared or were detained in Libya demonstrated Monday in front of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rabat. The families are calling for the intervention of authorities to repatriate their relatives before their situation gets worse. Moroccan authorities said last week that they are currently working to repatriate a large group of Moroccan migrants who are currently stranded in a detention center in Libya. An official in the Foreign Ministry also said that several government departments are involved in the repatriation operation.
We ask God and the authorities to bring back our children as soon as possible. All this is making us suffer.
The families are demonstrating to ask the authorities and the ministry to give travel documents. There is an organization called the International Office for Migration that helps detainees return to their countries, for those of them who wish to do so. All the Moroccan authorities need to do is prepare the travel documents. Unfortunately, people have been waiting for this since February. My son went to Libya after his studies to improve our situation, but things didn't work out for him, and now he is being held in Libyan prison.
The United States has threatened to take further action against the South Sudan government if it does not end the violence and allow United Nations peacekeepers to do their job. But UN sanctions are unlikely, as Russia has warned against such a move. A month after U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, visited South Sudan and met with President Salva Kiir in the capital, Juba, she told the UN Security Council that words are no longer sufficient. The Trump administration imposed sanctions in September on 2 senior South Sudanese officials and the former army chief for their role in the civil war and attacks against civilians. The council sanctioned several senior South Sudanese officials on both sides of the conflict in 2015, but a U.S. bid to impose an arms embargo in December 2016 failed.
We thank ASG Bento Keita.
Words are no longer sufficient. The United States is prepared to pursue additional measures against the government, or any party for that matter, if they do not act to end the violence and ease the suffering in South Sudan.
Words are no longer sufficient. The United States is prepared to pursue additional measures against the government, or any party for that matter, if they do not act to end the violence and ease the suffering in South Sudan. It is counterproductive to impose targeted sanctions, counterproductive to impose an arms embargo. Such measures will not help this deadlock and will only further exacerbate the crisis.
Elsewhere, a Zimbabwean court found activist Pastor Evan Mawarire not guilty of subversion in a case that has been scrutinized as a barometer of independence of the court under new President Emmerson Mnangagwa. Mawarire has been a stringent critic of former President Robert Mugabe, who was forced to resign after 37 years in power last week under pressure from the army and ruling ZANU-PF party. Critics allege that Zimbabwe's courts for decades have been used as a tool for political repression. The pastor's #ThisFlag movement had been a thorn in the side of the former Mugabe government. In 2016, he led a stay-at-home demonstration that led to the first of his several arrests.
I am absolutely elated today that the courts have decided, after considering the evidence that came before them, that I am not guilty and that the charges that were leveled against me do not hold any water, and of course they have proceeded to discharge me on both charges, one which was the main charge, which was subverting a constitutional government, and the alternative charge, which was inciting public violence. Now, whilst I am thankful for my discharge and for the release today, it is important for me to also mention that we should never have found ourselves in this place. It's sad that the citizens of our nation have to go through experiences such as the one I've gone through, where for 11 months you fight for the right to do what your constitution allows you to do. We should never have been arrested. We should never have been intimidated. We should never have been beaten. We should never have been accused the way that we've been accused. And it should never happen again.
I think it's a very welcome ruling. I found the judgment to be very precise insofar as pronouncement of citizens' rights are concerned, in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of freedom of association, in terms of freedom of imparting and distributing ideas. Also of keynote is an issue which has not had an opportunity to be determined by the courts. The issue of the right of every citizen to challenge and support the policies of government. So this is what has happened. The pastor is a free man. He has been acquitted of all the charges, and we welcome the judgment.
Meanwhile, white farmers in Zimbabwe are cautiously optimistic about the future after the new president pledged to compensate those who lost their land following controversial reforms in 2000. President Emmerson Mnangagwa made the promise during his inauguration speech, but also made it clear that the land reforms that sparked the violent seizure of thousands of white-owned farms that were still ongoing this year would not be reversed. Once a regional breadbasket, Zimbabwe saw its economy collapse in the wake of the land seizures, followed by runaway money printing that catapulted inflation to 500 billion% in 2008. So Zimbabwe's new president is under pressure to deliver, especially on the economy.
At this stage, I'm a bit nervous. It's so early days for the new president. We haven't seen a reaction out of him yet. And while we've had this little power vacuum for the last week, we've had a hive of activity on the farms.
I'm totally optimistic that President Mnangagwa is going to carry out that promise. And I think we're looking at a brighter future in Zimbabwe.
The European Union and the UK are looking very closely at Zimbabwe, and they want to get a foot in the door. They're not going to be the last in here. They want to be first in here. But they don't want to set up orders and set up pack sheds and horticultural projects that are going to collapse after a year or two.
African politicians attending the third China-Africa Political Parties Theoretic Seminar are looking forward to Chinese President Xi Jinping's keynote speech at the upcoming Communist Party of China in dialogue with the World Political Parties high-level meeting that is taking place in Beijing. Representatives of political parties from African countries and the CPC exchanged their theories and experiences in the governance of state and party and discussed how to build a community of a shared future between China and Africa. African politicians attending the seminar are highly concerned about what Xi will say at the opening ceremony of the high-level meeting between CPC and the world political parties.
But this, it is fully at the ANC conference.
We are looking forward to learning from General Xi Jinping's view on world development, especially on promotion of common development via Belt and Road Initiative. The second expectation is about the community with a shared future for mankind that Xi proposed. We hope we can make further elaboration to the participants at the high-level meeting between the CPC and world political parties.
As we
believe the speech of President Xi will bring us more guidance. We believe through his speech we can learn more about Chinese experience of development, and we also believe that China will drive the development of other countries, promote China-Africa cooperation in politics and infrastructure facilities, especially peace and security of the world.
The role played by political parties in this is about mutual respect and understanding our core values as political parties, what we stand for, what development agenda we have for our people. And we believe when we copy from this model of CPC, definitely Africa will be much better than what it is.
Well, Burkina Faso has officially opened the largest solar power plant in West Africa. The country wants to turn the renewable energy to fill the deficit that forces it to import electricity from Ghana and Ivory Coast. The 55-hectare plant at Zangtole, on the outskirts of the capital Ouagadougou, will be able to churn out about 33 megawatts, enough to power tens of thousands of homes. Presiding over the opening ceremony will be Burkina Faso President and his visiting French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, whose country partially funded the construction of the facility.
Work began in June 2016 and is now complete, and we are producing. We estimate that every year we will have to import 56 gigawatts of energy into the grid, which represents about 5% of energy produced compared to 2016. This will allow Burkinabe Power Station to effectively exploit the solar potential that we have, because in Burkina Faso we have about 5.5 kilowatts per square meter a day. It is the largest solar power plant in operation in West Africa today. Burkina Faso is a very sunny country and very popular for solar energy, since we will certainly have a lot of calls for bids in the coming months, especially for the extension of 17 megawatts, but also for other projects of 10 megawatts across Burkina Faso.
Researchers in the United Kingdom say a fast color-changing test that detects fluoride in drinking water could help prevent the crippling bone disease skeletal fluorosis in developing countries. Skeletal fluorosis causes crippling deformities of the spine and joints, especially in children whose skeletons are still forming. Adults are also affected. One sufferer is 60-year-old Kurianga from Tanzanian town of Oldonyasambu near the city of Arusha. People there have been found to be drinking water with naturally occurring levels of fluoride more than 60 times the U.S. recommended level. Kurianga's legs are badly bent and is forced to walk with a makeshift stick. He's currently undergoing corrective surgery in Moshi, but Bath researchers want to prevent future generations from suffering from the same condition.
Fluoride is something that people may be aware of as an additive in drinking water, and a little bit of fluoride in water is actually beneficial. It can lead to reduced levels of tooth decay, but too much fluoride in drinking water is actively harmful and can lead to a disease called skeletal fluorosis, which is a really devastating, crippling condition whereby bones are attacked by the fluoride. And when children drink water with too much fluoride in the long term, they can actually end up with very severe skeletal deformity. We've come up with a molecule which changes colour when it's exposed to fluoride. And this has several advantages over other ways of detecting fluoride, in that it doesn't require a laboratory, it doesn't require any specialist equipment, it doesn't require a person who's been highly trained to use any equipment. It doesn't require.
So in this case, the color changes almost instantaneously. So with fluoride, there is some. It has some specific energy, or it's surrounded by water molecules. So it takes a little longer actually to change color, but after a couple of minutes or even 30 seconds there, the results will be there.
All right, so we need to take a break now, but before we do, I'd like to remind you of our Twitter poll question. Tonight we're asking, is the African Union's proposal to adopt illegal immigrants sustainable? Tweeters at KTN News use the hashtag Bottomline Africa so that we are able to track your feedback. But remember, we're also having that conversation about migrants in Libya and that report that came out of migrants being sold as slaves in Libya. Trust me, that is a conversation you do not want to miss. Let's take that break now.